would be to provide central banks with the technology to be able to issue a central bank digital currency. And the second end goal is to allow the poorest 2 billion people in the world to have free payments, basically. And that's because the poorest people in the world pay the most for financial services. So there are about 1.7, this is a year old, there are about 1.7 billion people in the last count that don't have a bank account, that are unbanked or underbanked. They're in all the places that you would expect, except that there's an alarming number of people in places like Brazil, nearly 80 million people. In the United States, that's a lot bigger than you would expect. And even in Mexico, a pretty sophisticated banking system, but a huge group of unbanked people. They estimate that someone who's unbanked pays about 10% of their total income for basic financial services. And I can tell you that if our banks charged us 10% of our income just for the opportunity to bank with them, we probably wouldn't be at any of our banks today. But they have no choice and no alternative. There's lots of cash, particularly in the third world. And this is actually a picture from Zimbabwe. And it was taken by a BBC journalist who actually interviewed this guy and said, "Aren't you worried that someone's going to rob all this money?" And his reply was, "No, I'm not worried about the money, but I'm really worried about the wheelbarrow." So he actually said that there was more value in the wheelbarrow than in the money that he was carting around, which is quite extraordinary, and obviously had a really good sense of humor. There are many problems with cash, but one of the biggest problems is, I come from Johannesburg, and if you're a taxi driver in Soweto and your car breaks down and you want to then go to get a loan to repair your taxi, the bank looks at you and they don't know anything about you, and there's just no chance that they're going to give you a loan. If you're in Uganda, where about 90% of the population are subsistence farmers and you need to borrow money, there's no chance any bank can possibly lend you any money because they don't know anything about you. If you took all those payments that were based on cash and you put them into something that would be like digital cash, and you had a track record, and you can see I am a taxi driver, or I am a farmer, and these are the things that I've sold, and I do have an income, and I do work, and you can have the credentials, then you've got the basic requirements to be able to actually get credit. And the banks also have something upon which they can extend credit. And there are no physical banks in these rural places anyway, so you need to have the data where the people are. Does that make sense? The other problem with cash is that there's a lot of nefarious use, and I think if anyone who works in a bank here, you spend an extraordinary amount of time on anti-money laundering and terrorist funding, and the truth is they don't really send terrorist funding through these sorts of rails. They go through cash or they go through Bitcoin. They don't really go through bank rails. They do it on occasion. Perhaps there's more money laundering than terrorist funding. But when the other alternatives, including cash, that's where the money goes. So there is the nefarious use of cash, and so there's a huge opportunity to transform that. I think the third thing is that when you have a payment system that is built and run at a very low cost, you can actually embed consumption tax into it. And if you look at, Pakistan, 200 million people, about 1 million people pay tax. That's not a really good balance. Taxes have to be pretty high when there's so few people actually paying the taxes. If you look at Switzerland, tax is the lowest anywhere in the world, and that's because Swiss people just love paying the taxes. They actually like to pay them early. And with negative interest rates, they actually had to penalize these Swiss people that kept paying the taxes early because they didn't want to hold the funds. So that's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, but they also have the lowest tax rates in the world, but they provide an army and healthcare, and everyone has a bomb shelter in their house, and extraordinary things. So if you can actually start to tax consumption tax and collect it at source, you can actually transform the economy and have everyone contributing to the tax base. So there are a lot of problems with cash. The last thing I was going to say is that there are a number of economies that are dollarizing, and Zimbabwe is a great example there. In Zimbabwe, all the cash is now in dollars, and all of that cash never ever gets to a bank and never ever gets to the central bank. And that's because there's actually not enough to go around as it is, so it flows from person to person to person, never ever gets deposited anywhere. And because it never gets deposited, it never gets that multiplier because the banks can't do their magic of printing money out of thin air, and there's no money in the central bank. And because you can't do that, there's actually not enough liquidity in physical cash to get around. If we digitize that, there wouldn't be enough money immediately just using the existing economy. Remittance is also a problem, and remittance is a problem for inbound and outbound. So it's a problem inbound because central banks and banks often don't see the flow. It might originate in an account or it might originate in cash, but invariably in the third world it ends in cash. And we focus on the big money corridors, maybe money moving from the Middle East to India, for example. But there's just as much money moving from India to Bangladesh across the boundaries, and it's going on foot and it's going in cash. And there are lots of other schemes where the money doesn't actually move and you're just doing deals on both sides. And this also involves an extraordinary amount of under-invoicing, so that the margins are really built into this. So, globally, if you don't provide something that is an adequate solution, people find ways around it. So that's on the inbound side. On the outbound side, it's also a problem. There are many countries that have people who move to their country as economic migrants, and they're sending money home, and there's a huge toll on them sending that money abroad. So the money flower, I assume everyone's seen the money flower before. And this has got these 4 different areas that intersect with what we call digital cash or central bank digital currency. So I think the exciting thing about this is we do have things like Bitcoin, which perform 3 of the 4 functions, but what it doesn't have is that central bank backing, which is pretty transformative. And we do have electronic central bank money today. It's just reserves, and it's only for a handful of banks within the ecosystem. But if you could move to a widely held electronic risk-free claim against the central bank that could be interest-bearing, that really transforms things. So it gives you tools in monetary policy that you just don't have today. It also gives you an ability to deliver value directly to an end user. So think of the notional idea of helicopter money and how you'd actually deliver helicopter money today. It would be pretty impossible. But with a central bank digital cash, it would be pretty easy to deliver to very targeted places. Make sense? So universally available, electronic, central bank issued, peer-to-peer. So a little bit about NanoPay, founded in 2013. In 2015, we acquired Mint Chip from the Royal Canadian Mint. We're based in Toronto. Mint Chip was designed to replace physical cash with digital cash. And luckily for us, the Royal Canadian Mint did not have a mandate to actually launch the business. So they developed all the technology with experts around the world, and then they got to a point where they wanted to commercialize it and take it live, and they weren't able to. So we had this curious conversation where the central bank spoke to the Prime Minister, who spoke to the Finance Minister. We told them to sell it, and then we threw our hat in the ring and we acquired all of the technology. The unusual thing about Mint Chip is it was designed to be regulator friendly, it was designed to be bank friendly, it was designed to be central bank friendly. So this is not some crazy cryptocurrency that's trying to go around the existing ecosystem. This is for the central banks, it is for the banks, and it should actually increase deposits. So I think it's pretty transformative in its approach, and was always designed to be regulator friendly and cooperative rather than competitive. We do actually have the trademark for frictionless in financial services, and so I've had some pretty amusing conversations with some very senior people from organizations around the world, where I've had to say you cannot use the term frictionless without saying that it belongs to us, because pretty much everyone in our industry likes to use that term. But the real notion of frictionless is that we can do things at an extraordinary scale at a very low cost. So today we can do just over 50,000 transactions per second on a single AWS server. So 50,000 transactions per second. It takes us about 1 to 2 milliseconds to do those transactions. So they're pretty quick. And these are data-rich transactions. So how do we achieve that? Firstly, we hired a whole bunch of engineers from a telecom background. And in telecom, there's already scale. In fact, we built telecom billing systems that did 400,000 transactions per second before, with 250 different fields of data. So we understand how to really scale things. The second lesson that we actually learned from telecom was resilience. So one of our engineers actually wrote E911, which is what you use when you call emergency services. And any guess how many times E911's gone down in the last 20 years? Never, not for 1 second ever. There's no planned downtime, and it's kind of like an aircraft where you have to change the engines while it's running, and it won't go down. So that's real resilience. And if you compare that with the pretty basic infrastructure, which is closer to 2 nines that we deal with every day in financial services, telecom is transformatively better. The third lesson from telecom that we learned is ease of use. So, you know, as soon as you send a wire from a location that you're normally not at, or you use your credit card, amazing that, in a foreign country, they stop everything and there's panic and there's fraud. And, you know, I must have had my credit card stopped 3 times in the last 3 weeks, but they didn't actually pick up the $30,000 of fraud on it that actually happened in Toronto, right? Our colleague Simon put it into a dodgy website, and 30,000 went out to some Saks Fifth Avenue in about 15 minutes. And I called them. I said, I didn't do this transaction. They didn't call me. So there are all these sophisticated systems which they keep turning off my credit card when I really need it, and they don't turn it off when someone else is doing the fraud. But if you think about your mobile phone, you can step off a plane anywhere in the world, and it just works. And you don't have to do 2-factor authentication. You don't have to log into anything. You just turn it on, and it works. And are you worried about someone stealing your voice or your data? No, it's never happened, right? It just works, and it's more secure, and it's easier to use. So we've tried to embed those principles into our platform. So getting back to scale. We can achieve scale because our software is not written by people. It's written by a framework. It's called Foam. It is created by one of our engineers when he's at Google. And what it does is we build models, and it turns these models into code, and it runs it super efficiently. And that's why if you compare us with the UK's faster payments, £1 billion investment in hardware, 2,500 transactions per second, 10 to 15 seconds to do a transaction, they settle the next day. Our platform, 50,000 transactions per second on a single AWS server, costing $3,500 a month, right? And our transactions take 1 to 3 milliseconds. So, you know, transformatively different scale at a fraction of the price. And if you do that on a price per transaction per second, it's about $100,000, 100,000 times cheaper. 100,000 times cheaper. So if Elon Musk can reinvent space with an 8 to 10x advantage, what do you think we can do by this next generation of technology that is going to be able to transform the way we make money? At NanoPay, we focused on 4 different things. We focused on business-to-business transactions, and in that it is inherently cross-border. Everything in our platform is native ISO 20022. The rails themselves are already encrypted. We do complex atomic transactions, which allow us to have more than 2 parties in any transaction, and also different asset types. And that allows us to do pretty extraordinary things. So we could have a stock or bond moving in one direction and cash moving in the same single atomic transaction. So then we do cross-border for banks, and we do liquidity and rails. Rails are really at a national level, and the ultimate end goal is to provide the technology to central banks. So I just wanted to finish with a couple of predictions. My first prediction is that in the next 18 months, we'll see the first central banks issue a digital currency at scale, and really did well. My second prediction is that in the cryptocurrency world, or crypto asset, or whatever you want to call it, there are a lot of people that are going to go to prison. Most of them are going to fail, and they're going to be 1 or 2 unicorns. I don't foresee more than 1 or 2 actually surviving. The rest will either go to prison or fail. And you know, I think the third thing is that there's been this big move in many countries to go towards faster payments in general. And I think faster payments are just a stopgap to the end game, which is actually a central bank digital cash, because that is the ultimate payment rail. effectively running through the central bank in real time, and it gives the entire ecosystem, whether you're a business or consumer, an opportunity to interact directly and have a risk-free payment with the central bank. So, final thing is, for the poorest people in the world, when you have the ultimate rail at a fraction of the cost, you don't have the needs of identity or documents or an expensive bank account, we can transform the way the unbanked transact, and we can do that all for free. Thank you very much for your time. A couple of minutes for questions, if anyone's got any questions.
If you're saying that the currencies, that cash should be issued by a central bank, how do you get that bank leverage?
How do you get the bank leverage? Yeah, so the question is, if the central bank is issuing it, how does the bank get leverage? So the bank doesn't get leverage on the central bank digital cash, but the banks should participate in delivering the central bank digital cash to people, just the way they do with cash today. The interesting thing is, if you live in a rural place and you go to an ATM today to get cash, how much cash do you withdraw? The maximum, right? Because you don't know when you're going to see another ATM. All that cash is sitting in your wallet, and it's dead money. It's out of the banking system, so your balance sheet's unchanged. Bank's balance sheet's gone down, not good. If you transform that and make it digital, and in real time you can move money from deposit to digital cash, then you leave as much money as possible in the bank, so deposits go up, and you only move it when you want to transact, and that gives you an ability to transact in real time. And the same is true on the other end of the spectrum. So if you look at the younger generation, they're so lazy, they would never ever walk an extra mile to an ATM, so they go to the closest ATM. So if they have to pay a fee, they withdraw the maximum amount of money, so that it's a minimum percentage that they have to pay. So the logic works on both ends of the spectrum.
So what you're saying is the increase in the system is based on deposits.
Yeah, so deposits go up, but you also have more liquidity, because you can convert cash into deposits much quicker than you can in a paper-based world. Other questions? Thank you all very much for your time.